over to the presenters. People are still joining, and they will, so we're just going to get going. So again, thank you everyone for being here. As I say, my name is Bianca. I work as the programs manager and on networks and membership with the Global Secretariat, and really good to have you all here. Today, the session is around alcohol, masculinities, and violence, and understanding connection and the connections and exploring solutions. And it's going to be presented by Prevention Collaborative. We've got Ruti, and then from the Foundation for Innovation and Social Development, we have Samitha. So just a couple of really quick tech things so that we can all understand each other before we go any further. We do have live interpretation, English and Spanish. So if you'd like to hear the session in Spanish, then you go to the bottom of your Zoom screen and you'll see that globe icon. You click on there and then you click Spanish or English. So those are the options there. We do have a couple of other options in case there are others that are needing translations in other languages. They are AI. They're not as perfect, but they do work. And so we have Wordly, which has live AI in a variety of different languages. And so to get to Wordly, and it is actually, I've opened it on the channel, so you should be able to just go straight there. Sorry, I'm getting myself confused and forgetting I'm sharing screen. If not, I will put the instructions in the chat as soon as I'm done. But there is an option to go on Wordly. You can select many different languages. And because it is of the way that it's set up, what we suggest is creating a shared screen. So you minimize the Zoom screen, you minimize the Wordly screen, and then you can put them together, and that really helps to follow the flow. So that's just a suggestion. And then the other option that we have is also Zoom translations, and there you would click on closed captions in the Zoom, and that then gives you the option of which language you'd like your closed captions to be in as well. They don't tend to be quite as good as the Wordly, but there are a variety of options for different languages that are available. So really wanting to let everyone know that. If you're having any challenges accessing the language options, please just write in the chat and we can support you in the chat. And then Menengage Alliance likes to introduce participation guidelines, and it's really just about creating these safe, inclusive, respectful spaces. We're really wanting to encourage positive learning and engaging experience for everyone that's here. So we ask that we're respectful, that we take responsibility, that we're inclusive, and that we follow online rules of friendliness. And just a disclaimer that if anything is happening that feels not good for the rest of the participants, we do have the right. We've never had to, but it is there. And then just one thing else I wanted to add is that these are the peer learning sessions from the collab. It's an opportunity for members to be sharing about the work that they're doing. We're looking at kind of getting together best practices from the field, lessons learned, sharing examples. So if you feel that you have work that you would like to share, I encourage you to go into the Menengage website and to look at the information there about the sessions, and I'll share that link in the chat as well. And then feel free to also potentially share your session with us. And so with that, I'm going to hand over to our presenters today. So Ruti and Samitha, over to you.
Thank you, and hi everybody. It's really nice to be here. Before I share my screen, I just wanted to say that this topic around alcohol, masculinities, and violence is one that can be quite controversial. There's people with a lot of thoughts and opinions, and we'd really like to hear them. So please feel free to write in the chat, and we will have also time for Q&A, but also really discussion. So just like Bianca was saying, to share your experiences through another collab session, please also share your experiences in this collab session. Let me just share my screen. One moment. Here we go. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. You can see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right. So I will start by sharing a bit of an overview about alcohol, masculinities, and violence, and then pass it over to Samitha, who will talk about a very, I think, very innovative program that she's been involved in for many years now that really looks at this intersection. So hopefully together you get both a big picture and the details of practice and implementation. So my name is Ruti Levtov. I work at the Prevention Collaborative, and we came to this topic really because the collaborative is focused on strengthening capacity to deliver violence prevention programming that's informed by research evidence, practice-based knowledge, and feminist principles. And we came to this topic of alcohol through what we're calling underutilized strategies, or topics that are focused or based on the evidence that might really make a difference in reducing violence, but for whatever reason are not commonly used in violence prevention programming, but also more broadly gender transformative programming and programming for men. And alcohol really is one of these underutilized strategies. So what I'll do is I'll share some background based on a recent evidence review that I'll share the links for later on, and highlight the connection with masculinities. We'll then talk about the pathways through which alcohol might lead to violence, focus on an overview of strategies that could help reduce alcohol use, and then finally highlight some lessons that we could take forward into the programming that a lot of us do that is group-based or community-based gender transformative programming. I just want to note that alcohol is related to a lot of different forms of violence. Our specific focus is on violence in the home, so intimate partner violence and violence against children in the home. So let's start by talking a little bit about gender, masculinities, and alcohol. In many countries, alcohol is part of the social and cultural fabric, and yet there's a lot of evidence that alcohol is among the leading contributors to disease, disability, and mortality. Alcohol use itself is quite gendered. Around the world, men do more of the drinking than men, but in many contexts, women's alcohol use is also increasing. And importantly, the harm from alcohol use is also gendered, both due to some physiological differences, so alcohol affects bodies in different ways, but also due to social dynamics and power dynamics and norms. Specifically, in terms of the link between norms around masculinity and alcohol, and Samitha will also talk about this, frequent and heavy drinking is often linked to these ideas about masculinity, about being strong and having a lot of stamina, aggression, competition, risk-taking, self-confidence. I think you might recognize some of these. And importantly, some of these norms and pressures play out in peer groups, particularly in all-male environments. So sports teams, in certain countries sports groups, or in certain contexts, university campuses, fraternities, and things like that. But it's also important to think about how alcohol can be used to cope with the sort of inability to achieve masculine ideals. And so it's masking and contributing to feelings of shame and inadequacy. And you're sort of creating a negative circle here, right? So you might be drinking to cope with not having a job, but then your drinking might affect your ability to have a job and create more conflict in that way. And create a lot of shame around both masculinities, but also around the drinking. Norms around drinking are changing for women in many contexts, where it used to be in many places not very acceptable for women to drink. That is changing. And it's important to know that there's really powerful commercial interests behind this. So the alcohol industry is massive and invests enormous amounts of money in marketing of alcohol products. And they often are looking to appeal specifically to these gendered ideals or stereotypes. So, you're often seeing portrayals of confident and successful men, and and increasingly also appealing to ideas of women as modern, as empowered, drinking to cope with parenting. So just keeping in mind the role of the industry in all of this is important. Sorry, next slide. All right. So what do we know about alcohol and violence? There is a wealth of consistent evidence in all sorts of different forms that men's alcohol use, and particularly binge drinking, which means drinking, quite a few drinks in one time, basically, so drinking sort of a lot and rapidly, is associated with perpetrating intimate partner violence. For example, in a study that looked across 28 different countries, the study found that women were 2.5 times more likely to have experienced IPV if their partner drank alcohol. Alcohol also increases the frequency and severity of violence, which is very important. And then I also want to emphasize that women around the world make this connection between alcohol and violence. And so listening to women's voices means acknowledging this sometimes controversial link. In terms of alcohol and IPV experience, so among women, alcohol appears to be both a consequence and a potential risk factor for experiencing violence. So women who have experienced violence may be using alcohol as a coping mechanism, or in a way to numb themselves in anticipation to or response to current violence. There's also some evidence, although it's quite mixed, that alcohol can be a risk factor for experiencing violence, but there's a lot of methodological challenges in trying to disentangle this. And finally, alcohol is also associated with violence against children, though again, the relationship here is pretty complicated and difficult to disentangle. Alcohol use by parents is related to a range of negative outcomes for children, including violence, and it's linked to poor parenting practices. And parents, again, may be using alcohol to cope with stress and frustration, especially if they have limited support and skills for parenting. But at the same time, the evidence suggests that having a child can also provide really strong motivation for change. And I think this is something that resonates across the board for gender transformative programming, right? That thinking about fatherhood is often a changing point for people to reflect on their behaviors. I don't want to go into a lot of detail here, but this figure just highlights how alcohol use, intimate partner violence, and violence against children are really deeply intertwined across generations. So that exposure in childhood to caregivers who drink, to intimate partner violence, or experiencing violence yourself as a child are then linked to adult experiences and behaviors. This is obviously not deterministic. It doesn't mean if you've had this experience, this is what's going to happen, but it increases the risk. So given all these links between alcohol and violence, at least for me, it was surprising why there hasn't been more joint efforts between, folks working on anti-violence, activists, and then professionals in the alcohol field. And a lot of this is rooted in historical or philosophical perspectives, with really the key to this debate being a concern, often from feminist activists and groups working on violence, that focusing on alcohol or putting attention on alcohol would actually undermine our efforts to bring attention to these underlying issues of gender inequality and power dynamics that drive violence, and that and that it allows perpetrators to kind of excuse the violence that they're choosing to use. And these are really important and relevant concerns, but we do need to find new ways forward that help us address alcohol as a real risk factor for violence from a gendered and feminist lens. And we can also look back in history where in quite a few places, early feminist activism also came from like the temperance movement. This is true in Aboriginal communities in Australia. It's true in India, in the United States. There was this historical kind of joint work. So this is a little bit, there's a lot of detail in the slide, but I'm going to try to talk through it fairly quickly. You can see this in the report. But the goal here is to talk a little bit about how alcohol can actually lead to violence, and in this case, intimate partner violence. So what you see on the slide now are risk factors for harmful alcohol use. And this is everything from structural factors like the availability of alcohol and the affordability of it. It also includes norms and peer influences around drinking, and then individual characteristics and risk factors, including age, negative experiences in childhood, like we just talked about, stress and poor mental health, poverty, certain personality characteristics, and it's probably you probably can see that some of these are independently also risk factors for violence. Whoops, okay, 1 second. Okay, in this next section, you see the pathways between alcohol and the use of violence. One is and these are related to one another, but one is a sort of a physiological pathway. So the influences that alcohol actually has on the body, which are lowering inhibition, affecting your cognitive abilities, and weakening self-regulation. There is also a pathway through kind of family dynamics or relationship dynamics where alcohol use can erode the quality of a relationship. It can erode trust. It can cause conflict over finances or drinking behaviors. And then finally, in this last panel, there's factors that change the likelihood of violence given drinking. So alcohol is neither necessary or sufficient for violence, right? If you're drinking, it does not mean that you are going to use violence. But there's a variety of factors that combine to either instigate or inhibit violence. These include, a variety of contextual factors like the drinking environment, norms and gendered expectations about what is acceptable behavior when drinking. And there's also situational triggers that like immediate events or circumstances that can exacerbate conflict, like a particular conflict trigger or when partners are drinking together. Very importantly, perhaps the most important takeaway from this diagram is that we have a couple of different distinct places where we can interrupt these pathways. We can intervene to reduce harmful alcohol use. That's that first red box. And we can also intervene to reduce the risk that alcohol use will result in violence. So let's talk briefly, and I'm close to done. Let's talk briefly about what works to reduce alcohol use. There are interventions at multiple levels, and these interventions are complementary and necessary. Perhaps most importantly, there's policy interventions that work to reduce the availability of alcohol. So, for example, by regulating how many alcohol outlets can be in a particular area or hours of sale, policies that reduce the affordability of alcohol or that tax alcohol, or policies that restrict marketing of alcohol. These, broadly speaking, are the most effective approaches. But there are also community interventions that work to reshape the drinking environment or change norms. And Samitha is going to talk more about a really unique approach there. There are group or peer-based support systems. One of the best known is called Alcoholics Anonymous. There's groups and meetings around the world And they're self-organized, and so it's an especially promising strategy because it's very low cost. It's, very adaptable, and the evidence suggests it's really very effective. And finally, there's individual or group-based psychological or behavioral interventions that help people with different levels of problematic drinking. Now, how is all of this related to sort of the work that most of us do? Most of us are not, I think, most of us are not alcohol experts. So first of all, within violence prevention programs or gender transformative programs, there are a handful of examples of programs that address both alcohol and violence. Very few. There's also few gender transformative or violence prevention interventions that explicitly, beyond the ones that are really focused on that combination, there's few that explicitly address harmful alcohol use, and honestly, relatively few alcohol reduction approaches that look at gender or violence prevention. However, several of the gender transformative violence prevention programs that you might have heard of, like Bandebarejo or Stepping Stones, have been shown to have an impact on alcohol use as well as on violence, despite not really being intentionally designed to do so, and including really very limited content on managing alcohol use. So we think that these group-based programs, one of the reasons that they've worked to reduce alcohol and IPV is because some of the elements that we routinely use in these types of programs also are used in reduction of alcohol. So, for example, they supported participants in strengthening self-regulation skills, so managing anger, understanding your feelings. They help build stronger social ties, often because of group processes that provide alternatives to drinking. And they strengthen also social ties with partners and children. A lot of our programs have aspirational goals. I think this is particularly true for programs around engaging men. You're not shaming men about their behaviors. You're talking about how a different, better way of being is possible. And in addition, this broader focus on masculinities and gender norms and building of relationship skills really help to kind of unpack issues around alcohol. Again, even if you're not actually talking about it. Also, a lot of programs talk about financial decision making, which makes visible the costs of alcohol consumption and raises this conversation. So basically, just to say, there's a lot of opportunities to further incorporate and strengthen alcohol reduction strategies within our gender transformative and violence prevention programming. So just to end, some implications for practice, sort of a call to action for all of us. The first one is really to just do something about it. So let's take some action on alcohol use. In order to do this, we need to strengthen collaboration and learning across the fields of violence prevention and alcohol, as well as mental health, which is closely related. There's opportunities to join advocacy efforts in communities or globally around gender-informed alcohol regulation. And this I'll talk a little bit more about, ensuring that our programming addresses gendered and relationship dimensions of alcohol use, so where we can incorporate elements into our programming. It's important to measure alcohol use and violence to better understand, in our program evaluations, in order to better understand the links as well as what our interventions are contributing to this. In both gender transformative programming and in alcohol prevention work, training, selecting, and supporting practitioners or facilitators to address both of these topics and to do it effectively is very important. And also, of course, recognizing the need for specialized support and establishing referral pathways. This is true both for alcohol as well as for violence. And then finally, in terms of what we see as the most promising is building on approaches. Again, these we see as the most promising approaches, and we're seeking, and we hope others will be interested in seeking opportunities for integration and for innovation. So through intentionally addressing alcohol use in our individual or group-based gender transformative programming, in connecting with or supporting the establishment of mutual support groups like Alcoholics Anonymous, so potentially creating connections or referrals across from our programming, and then thinking about using community mobilization to involve communities in advocating for in changing norms, but then also advocating for policies, alcohol policies, and their enforcement. So with that, I will pass it on to Samitha. I just wanted to, and I'll share these in the link, in the chat, links to our evidence reviews brief and another expert interview report, and encourage you to stay connected with the collaborative as well. So I'll pass it on to Samitha now, and thank you, everyone.
Ruti and Samitha, do we have time for a couple of questions before we go
sorry.
into Samitha, or is that okay?
We'll take some questions, Bianca, and then
Okay,
yes.
great. So colleagues, just to either put some there we got a raised hand already. So Özge, apologies if I'm saying the name wrong. And if you have any other questions, feel free to either raise your hand or put it in the chat.
Thank
So
you.
Ruti, I'm going to leave it to you. And if you need our support, we're here.
Thank you. And your pronunciation was correct. Don't worry. Thank you so much for this amazing presentation. I have one quick question about the research and all these panel A, B, C, and how are the relationships? Because normally for the panel B, those are mediators, and these results came from model testing, or is there any causal relationships between all these panel A, B, C, or is it just a correlational research that how we can take it? And thank you.
So that's a great question, and it's a big debate within the field around, what is a causal connection, what is not. The diagram that we present is really kind of more of a conceptual pathways, but many of these pathways have been tested, and some of them, I think that the evidence would be strong enough to, some people would say that the evidence is causal. And so, yeah, but it's quite complex. And I'm happy to share lots and lots and lots of resources talking about that. I think for practitioners, the key thing to think about is whether it's causal or not, how can we address these issues effectively to achieve the outcomes we're looking for, whether those are reductions in alcohol, more equitable attitudes, less violence. I mean, in this case, this framework is really around violence. So I think that's where, the discussion of whether it's causal or not is really important, but we can move forward either way and wherever you land on it. I see another raised hand. Thank you. Keen Mon?
Hello. Yeah, you can call me Kin. Hi all, I am from Myanmar, from Asia. If you happen to know about Myanmar, we did have a military coup in 2021, and of course we had long, prolonged civil wars in Myanmar. So I'm from there. I am this member, and sometimes I joined this meeting for my sake of interest in engaging my perspective and works. So I am like this alcohol plus, masculinity and militarizations in Myanmar is really impacting, hugely and creating, immense violence in large scales in countrywide. So I am interested in, if you could navigate me any resources that I could, because I'm interested to doing research on this, masculinity, militarizations, and the, violence to women, especially from, peace perspective, women, peace and security perspective. So if you have any resources or research or like anything, if you had, I would like to, hear more and, learn more, because I'm willing to do research on that.
Mhm.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm sure others in the chat could also share, but I'll make sure to link with you after with some resources as well.
Thank you.
Ruti, we had a question in the chat as well, where Jimmy was asking, many of our gender transformative approaches engaging men on building healthier masculinities take shape in self-help groups, similar to Alcohol Anonymous or other 12-step programs. Do we have any examples of projects that have successfully linked with AA groups? I think this could be really effective, but quite difficult to formalize and operationalize given the anonymous and decentralized leadership of AA.
That's a great question, and I'd actually like to turn it back to others. I did not come across examples, but that doesn't mean they're not there. I was searching through published literature, examples, things that are kind of written up, and I suspect that these might happen more informally. But I would love to hear if there are examples, and I do agree that it seems like a very aligned strategy. So sorry, it's not a more satisfying answer, but I'm hoping others might share as well. Maybe if no other questions, we can turn it to Samitha, and hopefully we might have a little bit of time at the end as well.
Yeah, can do that. Thank you, Ruti. Right. So thank you so much, Ruti. I think acknowledging most of what was said by you. And of course, we also in our programming in Sri Lanka, kind of, look at some similar strategies. But I'll be talking about a more specific one today, just to help how a ground level practical approach would work in terms of addressing harmful alcohol use to reduce family violence. So this is actually for our own benefit and for us to talk more comfortably with people. We call it a happy families approach because we really want to engage more families in the conversation. And also just to also add that I'm presenting on behalf of my amazing team led by our program manager, Alcohol and Drugs and Development. So this is all their hard work that I am presenting. Okay. So just to start the conversation, I just want to add that FISD, the Foundation for Innovative Social Development, most of our work actually takes place in the rural communities in Sri Lanka. And the work that we do is mostly grounded in intersectional, ecological, and gender transformative frameworks because it is it looks at men from different backgrounds coming from the rural, the plantation, and the urban areas, and also in different ethnic groups and different socio-economic contexts. So the approaches that we take with them also differ in terms of how these men really do engage and have the time, have the space, and kind of, have the interest to engage with this kind of programming. And also we not only just work with individuals who use alcohol, but also work with their families and communities around them, and also with children in these families as well. So most of our work is centers around like reflective dialogues that we take with men and boys, and also more focused on how a collective care approach, like we know that men do take care of each other, and they are really concerned about each other, especially when it comes to like getting together, having a drink. That's the kind of care that they are used to hear about, like how to support other men. If you are feeling bad, if you have a problem, so why not come together and have a drink and we talk about it. So that's the kind of care culture that had been created. But then within our programming, we create that a different kind of a collective care approach for men, where they could that it could also be a safe space for them to come together and talk things that they don't normally talk about. And the work that we do interlinks alcohol prevention with violence prevention, and also definitely it's like leading to transforming patriarchal masculinities, addressing different types of masculinities. So in terms, I think Ruti talks a lot about understanding the link between alcohol and violence, but let me also add a little bit on that. When it comes to social norms, it's like social norms often justify violence as something that occurs because of alcohol use, and that's the learning that even the children are getting from their elders, from the communities, from people around them, from the events that take place within their families. So there's a common belief that like men drink when they are stressed. He only hit me because he was drunk, and alcohol lowers inhibition and escalate aggression. So these are some of the strongest norms that we have come across, and definitely had been trying to address through the Happy Families model, which definitely focus on addressing both the causes and the enablers of this kind of cycle, like the learning cycle, which are more related to what it means to be a man. So in terms of challenging the misconception, I mean, just to have a little bit further look at what are some of the misconceptions, like real men drink to prove their strength. This links alcohol with toughness, suppress vulnerability, and also normalize risk-taking. And alcohol causes violence. It's not the man's fault. So which is kind of, excuses the violent behavior, not only by men, but also by women, as Ruti also mentioned, that there is a learning within women as well, and also by the communities, and which is also learned by children. So alcohol and like alcohol may lower inhibition, but violence is a choice rooted in power and dynamics. So not just intoxication. That's what we really want to establish, and like to engage men in more self-accountable conversations, because ultimately there's no one to take accountability for their own behavior, because it's done because alcohol is the cause. And drinking helps men cope with stress and failure. This definitely discourages emotional expression and promotes unhealthy coping mechanisms among men, as Ruti also mentioned from other, examples from other parts of the world. And like things like he only gets violent when he's drunk, otherwise he's fine. So this is something that we hear on everyday basis when we work with women collectives. So these kind of excuses, these kind of norms actually excuses violent behavior, and also silent victims, and nobody wants to talk about it, and once it is normalized. So when it comes to FISD Happy Family model, it creates a space for men to reflect on these beliefs in a very safe, non-judgmental environment. And it reframes masculinity around care, responsibility, and emotional strength. That's the kind of discussions that we take with men's group, basically in the community level. And the model also reinforces accountability by separating alcohol from the justification of violent actions, and promotes alternative role models of men who choose nonviolence and soberness. And there are definitely enough number of men who really wants to talk about these things and who really want to make an impact on other men who use alcohol as an excuse for violence. So I think it's really important that we recognize those men and also bring them into these spaces and also give them some kind of leadership, some kind of arrange for them to be role models for other men in their communities. And it engages families and communities in naming and rejecting harmful myths that is related to both masculinity and also alcohol use. I think these addressing myths are really important because sometimes, of course, I mean, like earlier when we talked about this, whether it's a correlational or whether it's causal, I think myths play a huge role in deciding what we really mean by that, what is the relationship. So I think it's really important to address these myths, not only among men, but also within families and within communities. So that's how we bring the families together within the Happy Families model so that families can talk. I mean, we create tools so that families can talk about these things in a safer environment that they would not have done or not be able to do within a normal circumstances. So addressing misconceptions, there are a few entry points that the Happy Families model uses. One is the caring fatherhood initiatives, where we engage men to reflect on their role as nurturing fathers. I mean, like there are many men who use alcohol within families, who use violence within families. They are, of course, fathers as well. And I think definitely within the narrative that they use to identify themselves, the fatherhood had been in a way forgotten. So I think we really need to bring it back, remind them, allow them to reflect, and allow them to find a new relationship with their role as a father. So we also engage fathers along with their sons in reflective dialogues, where irrespective of whether they use alcohol or whether they don't use alcohol, the amount of alcohol they use, the after behavior that they used to do. So we engage them in these reflective dialogues where, these intergenerational storytelling that we use, what happened with my friend, like what happened with my friend's father, and how did the son felt about it, how did my friend felt about his father's this kind of behavior. So these kind of storytelling approaches actually really works in terms of how the alcohol use and violence is being related, and also in terms of disconnecting that relationship. We also work with a lot of men's groups in terms of peer conversations, as Ruti also talks about how it's been used in many parts of the world, creating those safe spaces to reflect on the social pressure and also allowing them to redefine what it means to be a man, challenging social expectancies of alcohol, you can't be happy without alcohol. If you are sad, you have to take alcohol. There are so many expectancies that what alcohol can do to yourself. So it's really important that we address those expectancies as well. Most of them are really related to masculinities, and there are other expectancies that are related to the economy. They are related to other social pressures or mental health. There are so many expectancies that we really need to disconnect, address within these men's groups. So we all bring them together within the Happy Families concept, because ultimately, even men, all the time, they comes up with this kind of, goal in life, saying that we all want our families to be happy. So we do everything because, for the sake of the happiness of the family. So that is how we try to give it back to them. So that is what you want, then we co-create that together. So we also use community theater, the role plays, showing what change might look like. for both men, children, and their families. So I think creating those stories and looking at how other stories have got successful is really important for people to reflect. And giving that kind of environment had really worked within our Happy Families model. And also the model does not tell men what to do, and it kind of asks them to reflect on what they really want to be. That's how we really want to do it, so that we are also not judging men who are using alcohol. And also in terms of challenging harmful masculinities and as solutions, promoting caring masculinities have been really amazing. I think more than addressing alcohol or the related violence, promoting caring masculinities had really worked with men. Even men who use use alcohol extensively, I think learning to be caring had been really impactful, and they only really wanted some space and some non-judgmental, safer space to do it. So I think that is what Happy Families program had been creating, challenging those dominant, harmful masculine norms and promoting caring masculinities, which has led to a direct reduction in alcohol-induced violence. So Happy Families model makes the shift that encourages men to reflect on identities beyond drinking. Because, like most men who drink, who use violence, they have now have been given different identities that they can't take themselves out of it. And then they try to live up to that identity, thinking that if they don't live up to that identity, then they will lose any kind of identity. So I think it's really important that we create different identities which are not aggressive, but more or emotionally suppressing them, or like more, like more caring and more allowing them to be more emotionally expressive. So the model also create these safe spaces, as I said already, for men to practice empathy and vulnerability. I mean, definitely learning about their own vulnerabilities and sharing about their vulnerabilities and how that would lead to non-violence is really important. And we have actually had a lot of impact, a lot of stories of men who had come up and said that, like we like the way that we feel now, and we really want to sustain that. We really want to be in that self. So we really need support. And definitely men coming up and seeking support is really important in both in terms of violence.
Will you finish, Samitha?
No, I think I lost the connection for a while.
Okay.
Just give me a second. All right. Sorry about that. So I think I did this. Yes. Yeah, I was, yes. So so it's about promoting that kind of relationship through care, giving men presence for their own selves, and also like allowing them to take responsibility rather than taking control of their relationships or of the people that they have around them. So I think creating these safe and conducive spaces had been really amazing with men who have been part of our programs. And all these, I mean, I do have the consent to share these pictures. So all these men, they have been using, they are still using, but definitely they are in a different space. They are in a space that they really want to create new identities, and they really want to build up those identities beyond, like alcohol use and all use of violence. So FISD intentionally create this non-judgmental and participatory environment to challenge those harmful beliefs around these concepts. So some of the activities that we do, I'll just share some of it, are the family camps. It's a multi-day immersive spaces for families to come and reflect, learn, reconnect, do a lot of activities together, which they have never done earlier or never had the opportunity to do earlier. So those are facilitated sessions for men on fatherhood care, and also like allowing them to breaking the silence. And that's been a really amazing to see how men who had never spoken are coming out and breaking the silence within their family, and also like in front of other families like them, which is so sustainable. And kind of even when they go back from the family camp, they know that they have created that new identity and they can live up to that. Like they can without getting judged, they can be that new man. So I think the one that we specifically do with young people, adolescents, is journaling. I mean, if anybody is interested, I'm happy to share the journals that we use with the young boys to talk about some of these gender norms and masculinities for them to reflect. These journaling sessions help youth unpack peer pressure, masculinities, and alcohol use. And also to reflect on how either their fathers or other family members, other community members, kind of try to live up to these alcohol identities, and also related to violence as well. So the journals actually promote critical thinking among young boys and build up emotional literacy and help them build their identities beyond what they have learned from their elders or from their peers earlier. So I think that had been a very useful engagement with young people. And also this other thing that we do with fathers on having the close conversation with their sons while traveling. And we in our culture, in our society, there are a lot of engagement between father and the son while they are traveling to school, because mostly fathers go and drop their sons to school. So we use these spaces, we use these opportunities to create dialogue, because we work both with fathers and also with children in the children's clubs, so that from both ways we are pushing, we are kind of supporting, encouraging these kind of reflective dialogues. So we encourage fathers to use these everyday moments, walking to school, traveling to market, as spaces for meaningful dialogue, and also to bring out the questions like what makes someone strong, how do people drink, why do people drink, and then kind of spark those reflections for them to question each other, but not in a very destructive manner, but more of a constructive way, that they could find answers better than that they have been learned from the society. So this is a really nice picture that I really love to look at. This is a moment from a family camp where most of these fathers do use alcohol, and there are many times that they have used violence as well. But like coming into these spaces, forget about who they were and like what they really wanted to do, why they were using violence, but creating moments that they want to take back, and also making sure that their children are watching. That's the most important thing, because these family camps are mostly arranged, organized with a lot of engagement by young children. So they really want to bring their parents. They really want to make to see how they come together, how they discuss and build relationship in a different way, how their fathers become so caring and they express their emotions. So I think there are a lot of young boys who look at their fathers and have reflected that that's the kind of man that I really want to be. I want to see my father in this identity. So I think that really make an impact. So redefinition of masculinities, which are rooted in care, conversation, and courage are really important. Myths about alcohol and power has to be replaced with these lived experiences of empathy. And youth and men become agents of this transformation in their own homes is really, really important. So we also use storytelling as a method of transformation. It really works well because it makes invisible violence visible, because people normally don't talk about violence. It's a private thing, like it doesn't happen in our homes. So it's really invisible. So storytelling allows them to make it more visible and talk about it, visualize it, and understand the real impact of it. And also open spaces for empathy and shared experiences, and disrupts shame and silence because it's a very safe space, and help men to reframe their identity with care, as I explained earlier. So for us, these personal narratives happening within small circles had been really impactful, bringing out creating that atmosphere where we could talk about these misconceptions, talk about these co-relationships or any causal relationships, if you want to call it, and also reflect on their own vulnerabilities and what it means to be a man. And we also use testimonial theater where people come and act out things and get others' opinions and engage in conversations. Challenging these norms was really interesting to see. So finally, just to share some of the lessons learned, masculinity transformation definitely requires consistent, culturally rooted dialogue. And storytelling has been definitely humanizing change and reducing the resistance that there might be coming. And we do had certain resistance when we did not use this kind of methodologies. And care-based masculinities definitely resonate more than the critique. And alcohol prevention gains strength when tied to a family and community well-being. Those were our experiences. And finally, I think we learned that changing the narrative of what it means to be a man, away from control, toughness, emotional suppression, towards care, responsibility, and connection, not only reduces the need for men to use alcohol as a shield or excuse for violence, but also directly challenges the gendered narratives promoted by the alcohol industry. By addressing patriarchal masculinities, we can definitely dismantle both personal and commercial justification of alcohol use linked to dominance and aggression, which leads to violence. So these had been our experiences in nutshell. I would like to answer any questions you have or clarify anything that you might come up with. So thank you so much for listening. Yes.
Samitha, we have a question in the chat. Mela, do you want to say your question or should we just read it?
Can you read it to me?
Yeah, I can read the question.
Let me.
Is there any success stories from the previous violence against women, perpetrators or women and children, perpetrators sharing session as Alcohol Anonymous is a great way to the mental health support system. However, limits the reaches greater impact on more male and boys concerns on alcohol abuse as a way of prevention. In Indonesia, the age restriction in consume is above 20 years old. However, still there is always hacks to get it. And again, the number of violence against women, even femicide, causing from alcohol, both from their intimate partners or strangers.
Yeah, I think well, just first let me just talk a little bit about Alcohol Anonymous groups. I know, Ruti, like it's being used worldwide and there are success stories, but the most important thing is to know how these groups have been facilitated. That is where we sometimes go wrong. Like if it is being facilitated by other men who actually embrace harmful masculinities, or like, stronger masculinities, then definitely these groups, they don't learn to disconnect, those patriarchal mindset from alcohol. So I think sometimes that is the tricky part of Alcohol Anonymous, like unless you know that it is being facilitated in a way that would lead to this kind of, disconnections, redefinitions, it might re-emphasize some of the gendered norms. It might address some alcohol related issues, mental health related issues, but it might not disconnect, like it might not address patriarchal kind of, mindset. So that is where we need to be really careful about. I mean, you don't need to call it Alcohol Anonymous everywhere, like you can have your own way of doing it, where you create those safe spaces. That's the most important thing. And definitely there have been a lot of success stories where we bring men into this reflective dialogue and create those spaces. And I think my team who are listening today, they might also give the evidence that, we had a lot of men just, within the first half an hour, they started crying because they really want to ventilate, like they have been suppressing so much. So I think it's really important the way that you facilitate, and also like from women's point of view, like how when we kind of do these engagements with men, how do women react? What is the readiness of women to engage in a similar conversation with men when they go home? Like what are their expectations from men? So I think these things are also need to be carefully looked at. And I see that somebody is also asking like how do we follow up with them? So it's the following up has to be, that is why a family approach is very important. Like you can't just follow up with one single man, or men who are like engaging individually. So there has to be different kinds of follow up, not that an organization goes and follow up all the time, but how do you create mechanisms within the communities so that the community themselves follow up, within the families children follow up, like it's ultimately owned by the communities. So I think that is what is most important, that we create the space, we engage people and allow them or transfer the skills that they need so that they can do the follow-up. They can kind of, identify the success stories. They can bring them to different narratives. They can share them again as storytelling, like for other communities, for other people, for other families. So I think that's the kind of rolling out that we really need to do in communities. So I don't know, that's what I feel about it. I hope I, yeah, did a bit of clarity there.
Thank you. Thank you, Samitha. Ruti, you want to add anything to
Yeah.
this?
Just very briefly back to the discussion of Alcoholics Anonymous, just to emphasize, Samitha, I think you're absolutely right. The alcohol field isn't touching really, as far as we know, for the most part, gender violence. Individual groups might, right? Because these groups are also discussion groups and topics might come up. But that's where I see the link between these two fields is really important. So, Alcoholics Anonymous uses particular strategies to help with the reduction of alcohol use, which is quite, some of it, like sometimes you need more support than what we're providing in our self-reflection groups and things like that. And so it's a system that could work well, but we could improve both of the outcomes if we try to find opportunities for connection and bringing in, norms and masculinities and things like that into it as well as some of the things that we do really well in our programming anyway, like positive aspirations and, thinking about what your family could look like and all of that. So I think there's a really nice opportunities for more integration.
Yeah, Quorum, there's a direct message as a question, and I would like to address that as well. Asking like how it seems like a extensive program, and how we cost such programs, and where the kind of expenses are coming from. I think I'm assuring you, most of these programs are very low cost, because as you correctly mentioned, that communities actually bear some of the cost themselves, because they see the benefit. And if you take a family camp where not only the couples, but children, community members, we engage more than 150 people in one space, and most of the food, the electricity, the chairs, everything comes from the communities, most of it, because they really want to contribute and make sure that it's part of their own engagement, so that they have something to take back. And definitely the amount of labor they give, the children who organizes, the children who wants to decorate the settings. I think it's the way that you engage as a community, so that that they also feel that they own these programs, rather than just it takes a bit of a project approach. Like we really need to move away from project approach, and we really have to have that kind of programming process where communities are engaging, and they are willing and ready to participate, as well as bear some of the cost as well. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
And Bianca, I see that a lot of people are asking for our links, websites, the journals. So I'm just thinking how we should share those things. Maybe after the session, is it possible?
Yeah, we can. I think we plan to share the recording, and we can also, if you share all the different links that people are asking for with me in an email, I can compose an email for everyone that registered. So not just those that are here, but everyone that registered, and I can share the various documents as well. So yeah, we can do that.
Okay, great.
Yeah. And yes, Kim, please go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, that's a very, great presentation to listen and, learn from it. So my question is still very general and also based on Myanmar political landscape. In Myanmar, for example, when we are discussing about this, engaging men approach, there is always, ongoing debate between feminist groups. Like, for example, one group, they may never agree, you know, not agree. I would say like culturally it's very sensitive, and a group of feminists may say, oh, it's we don't need to be gentle when we are, discussing about gender equality, like from very feminist perspective, like they may not agree. For example, like in current Myanmar political landscape, a lot of feminists are, raising their issue for women's participation in political landscape. So at that time, we do have a lot of ongoing panel discussions. So in that panel discussion, a lot of men are always, likely to lead the sessions, and there is a few female participation in such kind of panel discussion. So a feminist group, they just created a manual like sort of exhibition. In there they just name and shame a group of men just facilitating in this political landscape or something like that. So they even did manual exhibition. It's publicly available online. So such kind of approach, a lot of feminists believe that it should be, addressed in that way. But another feminist group, they might say that, okay, it's really harming and, creating backlashes to engage men, and it is creating sort of, hardship and difficulties to engage more men in real ground. So like there is always ongoing, such kind of political, ongoing debate between feminist group when we engage men. So I just would like to know your opinion. That's very general. Like, how would you approach to engage men, in reality? Your way is also very, positive, and it's very encouraging and inspiring. And at the same time, like there is sort of tough conversation in political landscape that should be addressed and alert in a very highly I don't know how to say it. I don't have the word radical way, or I don't know. Yeah. So how would you comment on our situation?
Shall I go ahead, Ruti, and maybe you can also add? So, sorry, Kin, I think I really do understand what you're trying to explain, because it's even there in our countries. These debates are going on, but what we really want to make sure in our engagement with men and boys is that making sure that you are holding them accountable. It's creating a space for them to talk about it, creating safe spaces, having the non-judgmental kind of engagement is really important. But it's not that you are not holding them accountable. I think that is where the feminists are coming from, and that is even myself as a feminist would question. Is it that easy? And can you just forget about everything that happened? Can you forget about all the violence, and now you are sympathizing with men? So I think those are very, very valid questions, but definitely in our programming, making sure that you dismantle power, and that you talk about sharing power. And definitely these reflective dialogues that we do take with men are mostly on accountability. How do you take yourself accountable to the behavior? How do you be accountable to your family, accountable to your son, or to your daughter? So these conversations sometimes really hard, but definitely have to take. But allowing them, because we know that patriarchy is also suppressing men, and that is why we really need to create the environment that men are also able to talk about patriarchy and how it affects them. So that's the most important thing, convincing that our work is really accountable.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your discussion.
I think if I can just add to that, and this in some ways is like a crux of a question, right? I think Men Engage often has to deal with this question. It's really important, and it's can be controversial. So I'm sharing here my opinion, but I think we have to think about both accountability and also what works and how those combine together. So I think we now have a lot of experience in from even behavior change, that shaming people is just not going to get you the outcomes that you want. So thinking about ways in which we can encourage reflection, we can encourage accountability, we can link to positive goals, we can link to, men thinking about the experiences of violence or the negative experiences that they had in childhood, which I think is something that many of our gender transformative programs do, to help you understand the ways in which, these gendered power dynamics aren't working for you, aren't working for anyone, is really key. Plus, thinking about, in the context of alcohol, the other ways in which you can support change. So whether that's reducing availability, whether that is thinking about, we were looking at this really interesting study that varied the time. So this was a policy that varied the time that people got paid. so that people didn't all get paid at the same time and then would take their money and go to the bar and drink and come home and use violence. So even that had a role. It was able to reduce violence because there wasn't as kind of as large of a peer group drinking at the same time. So I think we have to be both. We have to take these things into account at the same time. I'm not sure if I'm being very clear, and I know there's others in the room that might want to speak to this, but I think it's really time for us to try to have, open more spaces for these conversations, find ways to work together more to reduce alcohol use, to reduce violence, to promote more equitable norms and more equality in our world. So that's kind of the perspective that I bring to it.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear about it as well. Because like over like a decade of my working experience in this field, like in the past, I used to be, vocal a lot on such kind of, criticism. But lately, what I found was it is really not working sometimes. And yeah, but like Myanmar situation is really complicated, and we do have multiple layers of issue to address at the moment. Yeah, but the discussion points are really helpful. Thank you all.
Does anyone have any other questions? Okay, someone does have in the chat. How about when the peer group is unified by poverty and idleness due to unemployment? How do we navigate systematic issues in preventing alcohol abuse?
You want to come, Ruti, or?
Babe, do you want to go ahead? I don't have a lot to say other than,
Sure,
it's.
Sure. So I think this is the kind of target groups that we really work on everyday basis, and whenever that we start talking about either violence or alcohol, people immediately relate that to poverty, and it's really funny how even the like even some of our national policies, even some of our national stakeholders would also immediately link it to poverty and saying that, unless you address poverty, these issues are not being, it's really difficult to solve any of these. So I think that is also a norm that we really want to disconnect the connection between violence and poverty, or alcohol and poverty, and it's people, that's kind of conversations that we have with men who come to these peer groups, because the norm is that when you have being the breadwinner and trying to accommodate all family needs, men do have their own pressures, and they are going through a lot. And like when you have all these problems, the peer, always the friends will lead you to like having a drink in the evening, and then everything will be solved. But ultimately, that on the other day things have like even escalated, that you have many other problems that had been piled up into the problems that you already have. So I think when people start understanding the benefit, how some of these conversations really help them reduce their problems, not the alcohol. I think they themselves disconnect alcohol and poverty, or violence and poverty. It's not that we have to go there and disconnect everything with them. So allowing them also to understand and have those peer discussions. And that is why I said storytelling had been really impactful, because then they are really reluctant to talk about their own stories. But when they listen to other stories and reflect on those stories, they really understand that okay, it's quite related to what I go through, like it's similar to my story. So how has other people came out of these things, irrespective of whether they are poor or not, really help them to kind of, I'm not saying that it solves everything, but really help them reflect. So I think it's a process that you really need to make sure that people engage in and that come to that kind of self-realization. So that we are only there to facilitate.
And just to add very quickly, of course, I mean, Khurram also was mentioning that, rich and middle class also drink, but like with many things, the negative impacts are sometimes exacerbated by poverty because you might not have access to, as good healthcare or services or things like that. So obviously these structural issues of poverty are really important to address. At the same time, just like Samitha was saying, I mean, one of the things that we heard when we were doing, we did an interview study asking experts around alcohol. We heard that these activities where people like track their spending or talk to their partners about spending around alcohol, that also is a really strong link to violence. So the financial pressures that are created. And so, raising some awareness of that, it's often a very popular activity where people look at finances. And also another thing that we learned from kind of the alcohol experts was that it's really important to help people plan for situations that might be challenging for them, right? So you had a really hard day, just like Samitha says, your friends want to take you to the bar. So how might you plan in advance for that to not lead you to excessive drinking and excessive spending or things like that? So there's ways that can help people monitor their behavior, reflect on things like that can make that link. But I just want to make sure that we're not sort of equating, talking about your own budget and things like that with these broader policy, or not policy, but structural issues that obviously also need a response.
Thank you, really so insightful to have these conversations and others as well for participating. Does anyone have any other question? Otherwise, we can close the session now, right, Bianca?
Yeah, I'll do a close when you're ready, but you can let me know when you're ready.
Well, we have like 2 minutes. I just had one question to maybe Samitha, like, so this happy family programs and doing this community work, it is a very communal level work, right? So it's not just individual level as you described. Do you also see it going more onto policy and advocacy level in terms of pushing for change, like men themselves and go and push for structural change?
Definitely. Khurram, I think our work actually not limited to the community engagement, but a lot of evidences are being collected, are being generated at the community level, which are really helpful in pushing the policies. Because, like these misconceptions, it's not like, that we can't say that these misconceptions are only with the people at the communities. It's at all levels. Even the policymakers have these misconceptions and they would really love to kind of, go around the bush and not address them properly. So I think it's really important to convince them, to advocate, saying that these changes are possible and these are the ways that you need to intervene. And sometimes, utilizing their own officers, doing things that are not really worthwhile, doing things that are not really working at the communities. So we also engage in a lot of capacity development with government officers, capacity development with CSOs, other CSOs, like helping other civil society organizations who are working with children, who are working with women, or who are working on livelihood. So how do you integrate? So mostly, I think that's the important part that I really like that you asked that question, because we do have that integrated approach where you don't address either the problem alone or address the target group alone. No, it has to be kind of, a very holistic integrated approach where you talk about it at different levels, and also making sure that things are practically happening, because sometimes you just talk policies, you just talk technical things, but nothing is happening at the ground level. So having both ends meet is really important. And we definitely in Sri Lanka, we definitely push policies. We work along with government, and also we advocate with the government. So I think that's how we really make it happen. And evidences are really important, and that is where the communities comes up and help a lot in that.
Thank you.
Great. So thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Ruti and Samitha, for the session. It's been really good having you both and learning from you both. We will share the recording and the documents that have been talked about today. And just a reminder to go onto the MenEngage website if you're interested in hosting a peer learning session. And you can get more information there. And I'm just going to put those links in the chat again really quickly. And yes, that's it. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here. Look out for more sessions that are coming up. And Ruti and Samitha, thank you again. We will see you all again online, I'm sure, at some point. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Take
Thank you so
care.
much.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. Bye. Thank you
Thank
so
you. Bye.
much.